Have you ever stopped to calculate the absolute mathematical impossibility of nearly every major, rapidly developing city on Earth accidentally burning to the ground within the exact same narrow window of human history? Welcome back to the archive. I am Henry, and today we are opening files that challenge the very foundation of the modern historical timeline. We are looking beyond the official explanations of clumsy cows, dry summers, and unfortunate accidents to examine a chilling, coordinated pattern of destruction that swept across the globe in the mid to late 19th century. Mainstream history asks us to blindly accept that the great cities of the Old World, magnificent metropolises built largely of heavy brick, thick masonry, and colossal stone, were repeatedly and completely vaporized by simple wood fires. But when you sit down with the original declassified photographs from the aftermath of events like the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, the Boston Fire of 1872, or the devastating blazes in Seattle, Baltimore, and San Francisco, a deeply unsettling and technologically impossible picture begins to emerge from the ashes. We are taught in school that these cities burned so fiercely because they were hastily constructed from cheap timber. Yet the archival images tell a completely different, almost terrifying story. You look at panoramic photographs taken days after the smoke cleared, and you do not just see the charred remains of wooden shanties. You see the absolute pulverized ruins of Greco-Roman style stone palaces, massive brick armories, and iron-reinforced banks. To understand the sheer absurdity of the official narrative, you have to understand basic thermodynamics. A typical structural wood fire burns at roughly 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, but the photographs from these 19th century anomalies show massive granite columns that have literally spalled and exploded from intense heat, solid iron tram rails warped and twisted like warm wax, and heavy thick brick facades melted and fused together into glass-like slag. To achieve that level of catastrophic thermal damage to solid masonry and structural iron, you need sustained temperatures exceeding 2,500 degrees, heat levels that closely resemble a modern incendiary bombing campaign or the deployment of advanced energetic weapons, not a stray spark from a kicked lantern in a wooden barn or a simple overturned stove. Independent researchers and architectural historians who dare to question the established timeline propose a far more sinister theory regarding this era of global infernos. They suggest that these were not random acts of nature or tragic accidents of early urban planning, but rather a deliberate, highly orchestrated campaign of controlled demolition and historical erasure. This brings us back to the controversial theory of the Tartarian Empire and the Global Reset, the idea that a highly advanced, unified worldwide civilization was recently overthrown, leaving behind massive, incredibly engineered cities that the new ruling class simply could not explain or integrate into their fabricated, linear timeline of human progress. According to this theory, the first phase of the reset was the mud flood, a cataclysm that buried the lower levels of the old world. But the surviving architecture above ground was still far too grand, too complex, and too undeniable to simply ignore. The magnificent domes, the towering spires, and the impossible stonework stood as towering, silent witnesses to a past that contradicted everything the new authorities were printing in their rapidly mass-produced history books. The new elites, desperate to establish complete control and push humanity into a new paradigm dependent on centralized, metered power grids, fossil fuels, and wage labor, needed a way to wipe the slate completely clean. They needed to systematically erase the magnificent, free energy harvesting structures of the old world and replace them with the bleak, utilitarian, and easily controlled architecture of the modern industrial age. The absolute most efficient way to achieve this massive global cover-up, to destroy the impossible masonry and clear the prime real estate for a rewritten history, was fire. By blaming these catastrophic, city-leveling blazes on dry weather, poorly trained fire departments, or the infamous and widely debunked story of Mrs. O'Leary's cow in Chicago, the architects of the reset could methodically incinerate the undeniable physical proof of a stolen empire right in front of a traumatized, bewildered, and newly displaced population. The fires provided the ultimate, unquestionable excuse to permanently alter the face of the earth, turning the glorious remnants of Tartaria into smoldering ash and paving the way for the grueling, uninspiring concrete reality we inhabit today. As we scrutinize the haunting panoramic photographs taken in the immediate aftermath of these supposed 19th century urban infernos, the visual contradictions become utterly staggering and practically impossible to reconcile with the official story of wooden cities burning out of control. When you closely examine high-resolution archival images of the burned districts in Chicago, Boston, or San Francisco, you are confronted with a bizarre landscape that looks more like a modern war zone subjected to carpet bombing than a city that simply caught fire on a dry summer evening. In many of these historical photographs, you can clearly see massive, multi-story brick and stone buildings completely leveled to their foundations, their heavy iron structural beams twisted like pretzels from unimaginable heat. Yet bizarrely, right next to these pulverized stone fortresses, fragile wooden telegraph poles, delicate trees with their leaves still attached, and flimsy wooden fences often stand completely untouched by the flames. This selective destruction fundamentally defies the natural behavior of a spreading, wind-driven wood fire, which consumes everything combustible in its path while leaving heavy masonry largely intact, just blackened by soot. But the anomalies do not stop there, because the photographic record of these catastrophic events reveals a chilling absence of the massive piles of rubble and debris that should mathematically exist when a sprawling, heavily built metropolis collapses upon itself. Instead, the ruins often look strangely swept clean, reduced to fine ash and isolated freestanding chimneys, leading some alternative researchers to hypothesize the use of advanced, perhaps directed energy technology or highly sophisticated incendiary explosives designed to completely vaporize the infrastructure of the old world, leaving nothing but dust and melted brick behind. And then there is the logistical nightmare of the immediate aftermath, a narrative so profoundly flawed that it practically demands we question the official historical timeline. Mainstream historians tell us that these devastated populations, people who had just lost their homes, their businesses, and all their worldly possessions, somehow rallied together in a matter of months to completely clear millions of tons of toxic, smoldering rubble using nothing but shovels, wheelbarrows, and horse-drawn carts. And then, according to the official story, these same traumatized, impoverished citizens instantly sourced millions of tons of perfectly cut granite, marble, and brick from non-existent local quarries, hired thousands of highly skilled master stonemasons who magically appeared out of nowhere and completely rebuilt their cities from the ground up, making them even more magnificent, heavily ornamented, and architecturally complex than they were before the fires. They supposedly accomplished this monumental feat of urban planning and high-speed construction in just 2 or 3 years, entirely without the aid of modern combustion engines, hydraulic cranes, or mechanized supply chains. The Tartarian reset theory suggests a far more logical, albeit deeply disturbing, alternative explanation for this impossible speed of reconstruction. What if the grand, neoclassical stone buildings we are told were hastily constructed after the fires were actually the surviving fireproof structures of the original Tartarian Empire that the reset perpetrators simply failed to destroy? According to this theory, the photographs showing the rapid rebuilding of these cities are not documenting construction at all. They are documenting excavation, renovation, and the deliberate alteration of existing ancient facades to fit the new, fabricated historical narrative. The elites simply burned away the wooden shanties and mud-choked debris that had accumulated around the grand architecture, cleared the streets, claimed the surviving stone palaces as their own newly minted post-fire creations, and strictly forbade anyone from questioning how a society of horse-drawn wagons could build a Romanesque metropolis in 36 months. This same pattern of deliberate destruction also perfectly aligns with the mysterious fate of the Grand World's Fairs and international expositions of the era, where sprawling temporary cities of unimaginable classical beauty were built for mere months of exhibition, only to be intentionally burned to the ground or dynamited immediately afterward. Researchers argue that these fares were simply isolated pockets of the old world architecture that were too magnificent to hide, but too dangerous to leave standing. So they were temporarily rebranded as modern plaster exhibitions before being systematically incinerated in front of cheering crowds, effectively destroying the evidence of a superior, lost civilization under the guise of public entertainment and controlled demolition. To further solidify this massive historical cover-up, one must look at the financial mechanics of these disasters, specifically the sudden, suspicious rise of massive insurance conglomerates and banking monopolies that immediately swooped in to seize control of the prime real estate left in the ashes. The survivors, possessing no proof of ownership, because all the city records conveniently burned in the very same fires, were forced to surrender their ancestral lands to the banks, completing a massive orchestrated wealth transfer that permanently established the financial elite we know today. The Great Fires were not just architectural resets, they were the ultimate socio-economic reset, a brutal, highly coordinated mechanism used to erase a free, advanced global society and replace it with a debt-based, heavily controlled industrial dystopia where the true history of humanity remains buried beneath the newly paved streets of the modern world. Look closely at the so-called historic buildings in your downtown area today, because you might be staring directly at the surviving crime scenes of the greatest architectural genocide in human history. The physical evidence of this orchestrated global reset is still hiding in plain sight in almost every major city that supposedly burned to the ground in the 19th century, if you only have the eyes to see it. When you walk through the historic districts of Chicago, San Francisco, or Boston, look past the modern signage and observe the jarring, almost comical contrast between the magnificent craftsmanship of the heavy masonry and the crude, clumsy additions made by the inheritors of the New World. You will see grand, arched stone doorways designed for a race of giants that have been awkwardly bricked up and fitted with standard-sized, cheap wooden doors. You will see intricately carved, fireproof facades defaced by a chaotic web of primitive electrical wiring, telephone cables, and ugly iron fire escapes, additions that look like a massive technological downgrade plastered onto a far superior infrastructure. This is the visual signature of a parasitical society that took over the magnificent, free energy harvesting grid of the Tartarian Empire and clumsily retrofitted it for their new, primitive, metered power systems that ran on dirty coal and oil. The architects of the reset could not destroy every single building with fire, so they were forced to repurpose the survivors, completely controlling who had access to the true history of the structures. This leads us to one of the darkest and most disturbing anomalies of the post-fire era: the sudden, explosive construction of massive, incredibly opulent lunatic asylums and state penitentiaries. Have you ever wondered why a recovering, supposedly primitive 19th century society would spend millions of dollars to build sprawling, castle-like stone fortresses with intricate towers, domed roofs, and luxurious grounds just to house the mentally ill or the criminal class? Independent researchers suggest a terrifying answer. These magnificent buildings were not constructed as asylums. They were merely repurposed Tartarian palaces. And the people locked inside them in the late 1800s were not necessarily insane. They were often the political dissidents, the holdovers, and the inconvenient witnesses who actually remembered the old world before the mud floods and the fires. They were the people who refused to accept the new, fabricated timeline, the ones who knew how the atmospheric energy antennas worked, and they had to be permanently silenced, medicated, and hidden away behind the thick stone walls of their own stolen heritage. By erasing the collective memory of humanity through these devastating resets, the new elites created the ultimate blank slate. They successfully implemented a global amnesia, raising generations of people to look at the past with a sense of chronological snobbery, believing that our ancestors were primitive people struggling with horse-drawn plows and candlelight. They blinded us to the fact that we are living in the post-apocalyptic ashes of a much greater, cleaner, and more unified civilization. We are taught that human history is a slow, steady climb from the caves to the smartphone. But the silent stone giants in our cities whisper a completely different, tragic story. They tell us of a global empire that understood the fundamental frequencies of the earth, an empire that was systematically murdered, burned, and buried, so that a small, ruthless group of industrialists and central bankers could monopolize energy and own the future. The next time you walk past a massive neoclassical stone building with half-buried basement windows and a towering copper dome that miraculously survived a catastrophic citywide fire, do not just look at it as a quaint piece of local history. Look at it as the physical proof of a stolen inheritance. The truth is written in the stones that refuse to burn, in the melted iron that defies the official narrative, and in the sheer mathematical impossibility of the timelines we were forced to memorize in school. Thank you for having the courage to step into the archive with me today and confront these uncomfortable anomalies. If you refuse to accept the sanitized, fabricated version of history handed down by the victors, make sure you subscribe to this channel and help us open more restricted files. We will continue to dig through the ashes, uncover the suppressed photographs, and expose the massive deceptions that shaped our modern reality. Keep questioning the narrative, look closely at the architecture around you, and remember that the greatest fires in history were not meant to destroy cities. They were meant to destroy the truth. I am Henry, and the archive is now closed.